In this video, we're going to be creating some details using the strategies that we've learned in the previous videos. Not only is this a good exercise so that we can summarize all of the work we've done, but I think it's important to see this detail creation process as a thinking tool. By developing the section, we allow ourselves to fully understand how the building elements go together. And I believe strongly that this is one of the deficiencies in most sets of drawings. Usually a standard detail will get slid into a sheet, but I think it's important that the details reflect dimensionally accurate and thoughtful assemblies to make the building better and the industry better as a whole. So let's get started. I'm going to first of all show you some details that were drawn for some structural elements. And here's a detail here. Now, one thing you're going to notice right away is that we tend to use a lot of color and a lot of fills. My goal is to use as few lines as possible when putting these together. The fill just becomes a nice way to represent each element in its entirety. It's easier to draw, it's easier to manipulate. There are just less elements to keep track of. By using color, we actually are able to get these details to really pop. And even when you put this into a grayscale, they look great. So let's go ahead and get started. We're not going to do structural details, but I thought what we'd do is work through drawing a cross section of a cabinet. And again, this will demonstrate just how important and powerful creating these details becomes, in that it helps you to understand how things are really going together. In fact, it forces you to understand how things are going to go together. Before we leave the structural detail, I just want to note that it is important that you set up some standards up front, do some examples. If you're going to have other people draw details, you want to make sure that everything is consistently drawn. And that really requires setting up your pens and line weights, text size, and styles, all of that. And that's not something we're going to cover in depth in this video, but I am going to go ahead and open up the pen settings for you real quick and show you how we approach this. I'll have another video later that goes into this in more detail, but you'll notice first off that I don't use very many pens. I use these pens for my edges, my contours. I have a colored scale, and then I have a gray scale alternative. So basically these are the same pens being represented in different ways. Each one of these pens has a line weight associated with it. These are set up in points, which is my preference. As a reference, 72 points is 1 inch. So that will give you some context of how wide these are. And then these are the pens that I use exclusively for fills. And this is to enable me to get colors that represent the materials, at least in a conceptual way. So make sure that you go into your pen settings and decide how these are going to work. It is possible, as you can see here, that you can even name each of these pens just to help enforce some drafting standards in your office. I generally do these drawings in a worksheet. A worksheet is just a place for 2D elements. You can copy 3D elements into here, but when you do that, they are flattened into lines, circles, and fills. But it's a great place. You can use this with the trace reference, which we'll get into a little bit later. And you'll find that worksheets are just a great place to do your work. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new one here. I want it to be an independent worksheet, so it's not referencing back to any source view later. This is just a place to do drawings, and we'll type this, and I will call this, my ID will be cabinets, and I'll put cabinet details. Then we open this up. And the default is sometimes for this grid to come up. I don't really like it, so I'll just turn that off. I'll give myself a background. Now this is the 00 for the worksheet. It's not critical that you draw there. In fact, I'll intentionally not draw there. I want to make sure I get something in here to represent some sort of scale. So let's say I'm going to do a 10-foot one wall. Now I have some scale to work with. I'm just going to draw a cabinet up against a wall, and this is going to come over, you know, whatever, 7 feet. And then how to proceed. So these are just some lines. I should probably take a second and see which layer they are or which pen I'm using. So this, I'll use the heavier pen, the 0.9, just because that represents the wall, and seeing that easily will be nice. Now layers, I don't care about my layer too much when I'm drawing these details because I'm not generally displaying these in multiple ways. So if you don't, it's totally acceptable to use the ArchiCAD layer exclusively. Now, if you need to show these with different layer combinations for some reason, you're going to want to be a little bit more thoughtful, but that's really not the purpose of this video. So we'll just draw everything on the ArchiCAD layer. So the first thing I do is I begin to lay in some information that I know to be accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and F9 and just copy this to make a ceiling. That gives me the boundaries for my section that I'm drawing here. And then the next thing I'm going to do is just get in some rough geometry for my floor. I know that I'm going to be putting in a 3/4 inch flooring. Oops. I'm using decimal inches, so I need to put in decimal inches. And then I'll put in a 36-inch cabinet top. And so these are just reference lines that I moved up using F9. Obviously, these are too big. Well, the flooring can be there. Let's go ahead and lay in a material that's going to represent the floor. So I'll use a fill of wood flooring, and the light yellow and the dark black lines is going to be fine. I'm going to go ahead and use the rectangle, and I'm just going to draw this through. And now I used Shift to enable my selection tool, and it found the line. If it didn't find the line, I can hit Tab, and that'll scroll me through my options, but it found the line, so I'm going to just delete that. Again, I'm trying to use as few lines as possible. And even this line becomes unnecessary, but I'm going to leave it in there anyhow. Those will be just a few lines. And then I can take this fill and I can go ahead and copy it up. And I want to copy from the top of that fill to this line. I'm going to get rid of that line. This is going to become my countertop. I'm going to slide this over. Here's my pet palette. Just going to get it close for now. I know I have to get some dimensions later, but I'm just roughing out some dimensions. Here, I'm going to do a material that's just a 20%, and I'll do sort of a gray color to represent the slab, and I'll put a line around it, and I don't need a real heavy line. I'll do a 0.2, and that's representing my counter. Now I like to set my cabinets a 1/4 inch from the wall. So I'm gonna just get the back of my cabinets, which is our standard is typically 1/2 inch. I'm just gonna represent that with the 1/2 inch. And then now I'm gonna move this over a 1/4 inch. And I'm just gonna kind of keep working my way through this. Now I need a toe kick. So I'll copy that and rotate it with F6, bring this down, and my toe kick, I'm going to F5, my toe kick, I'm going to move my reference point, is generally 4 inches tall, not 4 feet. So this is my cabinet box, my toe kicks below that, and then you can just begin to make sense of all this. So I'm going to take this and F9. I'm going to copy from the top straight down. I'm going to use S, which is for slice. Then I need a cutting line, and then select the side I want to select, or click on the side I want to select. Then I can just delete that. And then I can bring this out, and let's go ahead and start by making a box that's 1 foot 11 3/4 inch, which is a typical dimension for a cabinet. An actual cabinet box is not 2 feet generally, because it doesn't make good use of the plywood. And then then this would represent the front. I can copy this, and depending on how your cabinets are being made, you might be using some stretchers, which are generally 4 inches wide. And if you don't know these dimensions, rough them in and use that as kind of a starting point. And then you can go measure some actual cabinets. Now I need a subtop on here, so I'm going to move these down 3/4 inch, copy this up with F9, and this will be my subtop, which means that this needs to come down so that you can see how nice it is to use fills, because I can just kind of pull and tug and get everything to work just the way I want. And typically subtops are actually 5/8 with some, normally 1/8 of an inch of caulking or some adhesive to put the countertop on. Now I can decide what I want my overhang to be. I'm going to use 1 1/4 inch. I'm going to move my reference. Very good job. Move my reference, which is Shift Alt, and it's a real quick pressing of the Shift Alt at the same time and very quickly. And sometimes it can be take a little finesse, so don't give up, keep trying it. So I move my reference point to that location to line up with the front, and then I'm going to offset 1 1/4 inch. And then we're going to be using a miter front edge, so I'm going to put a hot spot or a node there so I can pull this down, and I'm just going to bring it down another 3/4 inch, which gives me 1.5 inch face, but you can do anything you want. Now here you have some choices. If this is enough information, then that's great. If you want to show the actual miter, you can put a line, cut these into 2 separate fills. You want to show the beveled edge, maybe you put the beveled edge on here first. And this just becomes, how much detail you do want to put in. But what I like about this, I'm going to use them here. What I like about using the fills like this is that I can just continue to lay in as much detail as necessary. I can start with concept and then kind of keep refining. Maybe that's too much. Maybe want it rounded. It'll be good enough for this demonstration. And so this front, now that we have it here, if we're using a Euro cabinet, then this doesn't even really exist, and we just have the stretcher in the front. So I'm going to move this forward. And then we would have a 6-inch space here for our drawer, and this becomes our stretcher. And if we want to see the overall panel, we'll lay this in, and it would actually go behind here all the way here. Then we want to push this back, so we'll change our display order to send to back. Notice that you have some shortcuts here that you may want to take advantage of. And then I want to use a foreground fill or background fill, which just is going to use the color of the background here, and everything else will set on top of it. may want to even try a, slightly different fill so that it pops a little bit more. Then I'm going to work on my toe kick. So this, move this here, come back 3 inches, which is a standard 3 back, 4 up. I may want to F9 this to copy and show my finished skin on here, which is usually 1/4 of an inch. I can change this color of this to represent more of a finished edge. And you can see that I'm just layering information. I can start drawing my backsplash. I can go on and on. This is sort of a conceptual back. Often these backs are set in. I'll put this in 3/4 of an inch. Copy rotate with an F10. Bring this around and then back. And that's my nailer. I think I moved it far. Something didn't go well, so I'll just select these and I'm going to line this nailer up with the back of the cabinet. You have a bottom nailer as well. We can copy this. So there's a lot of reusing of these rectangular elements. It helps get the textures right and the colors instead of having to start them over each time. And if you want to go ahead and do cross sections of the doors and drawer fronts, we can do that too. And I'll do that. And this has an 1/8 inch space for the hardware. This door needs to come down so that it's only 1/4 of an inch above the bottom of the stretcher. And it looks like this is not, we're going to need to bring this down just a little bit more so the door can clear 1/4 inch over. Make this front come to, I highlight this edge and get the tick mark showing. That's to the center, and often then you'd go 0.0625 16th over, and we'll make this 3/4 of an inch. Again, I used Shift Alt to move my reference point. There's my front. I can copy this down here, F9 again, or F5, move it down 1/8 of an inch, and then drag this all the way to the bottom of the cabinet. And this is a very typical Euro style cabinet cross section. I can just continue and continue if I want to show the drawer, if I want to show hardware. And then this becomes something that is a fantastic reference for everyone on the job to understand just how this is going together. And it allows you to be clear on how you want things to work. Now I'm noticing that some of these got to be 1/2 inch, and which is great because weird things are going to happen and you need to be able to adapt and adjust. So the fact that I made that mistake is helpful. I'm going to use the marquee and drag it through here, hit F8. I'm going to move this up 1/4 of an inch. And I probably made this 3/8 of an inch, which isn't good. So let's go ahead and just work through. And this is something that's going to happen. And part of the design process is, seeing what works and what doesn't work. Now here I'm using an interesting approach with the marquee. I want to be a little bit more thoughtful in how I stretch this. So I want this entire door to shift, and I want to expand the thickness of the top of this wood. So I'm going to hit F8, and I'm assuming that this needs to be 0.5. I probably should have checked first. Nope, not 0.5, 1/4 inch, but we'll just undo, F8, redo. And that's 1/2. All right, I need to get in here and measure. It's hard to talk, and so that's 3/8. Again. all the way through here. And so we want to go a quarter. And then I'll move this marquee here, F8, bring this down 0.25 as well. And then I have some choices here. I think what I'm going to do is go back to my rectangular marquee, run this up 1/8, run this down 1/8, and then now this should be 3/4. So I'll use my measure, which is a good habit. And then I want this front. So this front is not 6 inches. So maybe that was one of our design goals. We wanted this to be exactly 6 inches. So then we can marquee this, click this point, move our origin to this, and make this 6 inches exactly. And now we have a 6-inch front, which could be the minimum for if you were not using a slab door, but a 5-piece front, you needed a 6-inch from the manufacturer. Now we've got it. Now that these are the right size, we actually might want to move these up to, and this is just going to be based on your standard. We often do a 1/4 inch below there. You'll notice this then needs to get extended. Move this to my origin to there and bring that down 1/8. And so now we have a standard cabinet. And this would be something you might want to keep in your file or in a standards file, and then just adjust it as the job requires. I'm going to just take a minute and I'm going to copy this entire assembly with F9. I'm going to do a very standard upper cabinet of 18 inches. I actually like to go a little bit more, but we'll just make it 18 inches. And show you how easy it is to then quickly make some adjustments using these fills. Again, you're going to see how nice it is to use the fills because you can make changes so quickly. But this one's going to sit, so I'm going to do an F5. This one's going to sit right in the wall tight. And I'll just check some measurements, make sure I didn't make any mistakes. Yeah, that's 18 inches, and this is 2'6". A little different here, so let's go ahead and just make this a standard 3 feet. So using my move origin, which is something that you really want to take the time to master because it is so fast. Keeps you from making everything a 2-step process. I'll marquee this and use stretch, and want this to be a 11 3/4 inch upper. Check my math. I must have clicked to the wrong point, so no problem. Again, that's the beauty of the fills. You know, things are always check your work, go back, make sure it was right. If it isn't, it's easy to fix. This actually comes down. This goes over. So this is more accurate. You wanted to show this as a dado. You have so many options here. So I move that up. It's behind it, but I want to actually cut this. I'm going to use the minus. Hit the space bar for the magic wand, and I just cut that little dado out. And these little added details just make the drawing more clear and more accurate. And it's kind of a fun little process. Take this, minus, space bar. Now I have those miters. And I can just keep going and going and going. I could put a crown molding in here. I do have another file I use where I have all my crown moldings pre-drawn, so I can just copy and paste them in. I could, quickly, You got to know when to stop because you can just keep going. I'll use F10, which is a copy rotate, move this up, hit S to trim this, hit delete, and there's a backsplash. That's a slab backsplash. Maybe it's tiles. So I might adjust it. If I wanted to show the drywall on the wall, you know, no problem. I could come back here and create this rectangle. And let's say I'm using 5/8 material. I'll bring this in 1/8. Now I can probably get rid of that line. And we'll use a different fill for the drywall. I'll just use that for now, but you get the idea. And then I can do a copy rotate and get this up here, set that in. Drywall ceiling goes first. Get rid of this line. And then you can say, okay, well, you know, these cabinets are too short. I want to put another cabinet on top for a secondary upper. And I can plop that on top. Come up here. Stretch that with the F8. And I'm going to come down 3 inches. And I'll just wrap this up here in a second, but let's put just a flat crown up on top so it's easy to draw. Take this door and bring it down 1/8. We'll use a little cleat here. 2-inch cleat. We want to indicate that that needs to be a finished section right there. And, you know, maybe we want to readjust this so that this is 6 inches taller, if that was the design we're looking for. Anyhow, this really allows you to work through the math and the numbers, figure out the look you want. And I recommend doing these types of drawings for just about everything. Even if you're going to plan on doing it in 3D, work it out in 2D at this level of detail. Then when you move into the 3D, you know exactly what you're doing and you're not struggling through it. And this becomes a real important communication tool. But as you can see, it also becomes a way for the designer to work out just how all of these elements are going to come together and reuse it. You know, once this is made, you know, this represents a lot of kitchens with some tweaks and some stretches. Change the ceiling height, adjust some of these cabinet heights, and you can, in minutes, can find a different configuration that's going to work perfectly for that project, and you're going to help everybody on the job. The important thing is here, keep layering. You know, I just noticed here, oh, you know, I really want a light rail, so I'm going to bring this down 2 inches. I'm going to put a piece in here. Copy the properties with Alt. So I copy those properties with Alt. And then the next thing I draw keeps going. So I'm going to do an Alt Y, which will lock in my Y value. From that point, I can let go of the keyboard and then I can just, in the dimension 1, put in the 3/4. And now I have a light rail here, and maybe it wants to go up 1/4 inch so it doesn't get exposed, and I have a place to put my light. So again, just keep layering and layering and layering. And these become fantastic to work out all of the wonderful details that make a job so important.